Sometimes the worst day of your life becomes the moment everything changes forever. Sarah Martinez thought losing her job at the local newspaper was rock bottom. She had no idea that her slow walk home through the quiet streets of Millfield would turn into a race against time, with search helicopters circling overhead and an entire community holding its breath. What started as a simple firing would uncover a web of corruption, put her life in danger, and transform a broken journalist into the town's unlikely hero. But first, she had to survive the walk home that would change everything. The story you're about to read is true. The names have been changed, but the events happened exactly as described. It's about how one woman's worst moment became her greatest opportunity, and how sometimes being in the wrong place at the wrong time is exactly where you need to be. Sarah Martinez stared at the brown cardboard box on her desk, feeling the weight of 11 years dissolving into nothing. The Millfield Gazette had been her whole world since college graduation, and now editor-in-chief Marcus Webb was telling her to pack up her things and leave before lunch. Budget cuts, he said, avoiding her eyes as he shuffled papers on his desk. Corporate decided to downsize the investigative team. You know how it is. Sarah knew exactly how it was. She had been digging into the new shopping mall development for months, asking uncomfortable questions about the rushed approval process and the mysterious investors behind Pinnacle Development Group. Her latest article draft sat on her computer screen, filled with connections between city council members and offshore bank accounts. She had been scheduled to meet with a whistleblower from the planning department that very afternoon. "What about the Pinnacle story?" she asked, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. Marcus finally looked up, his face flushed. "Drop it, Sarah. Some stories aren't worth telling." The words hit her like a slap. In 11 years of journalism, Marcus had never told her to drop a story. He had always been her biggest supporter, pushing her to dig deeper and ask tougher questions. The man standing in front of her now seemed like a stranger wearing her mentor's face. Sarah's mind raced as she began placing her personal items into the box. The small potted plant her mother had given her for her first day, the framed photo of her winning the State Journalism Award 3 years ago, the coffee mug that read, "Comfort the disturbed, disturb the comfortable," a gift from Marcus himself when she had exposed corruption in the school district. "I'll need your press credentials and building access card," Marcus said, extending his hand. She unclipped the laminated badge from her blazer and placed it in his palm, along with the plastic keycard that had gotten her into the building at all hours for over a decade. The gesture felt like surrendering a piece of her identity. "Your final paycheck will be mailed," he added, then turned away dismissively. Sarah picked up her box and walked through the newsroom she had called home for so long. The other reporters kept their heads down, pretending to be absorbed in their work. Jenny, the young intern who had been following Sarah around like an eager puppy, looked up with tears in her eyes but said nothing. The silence was deafening. At the elevator, Sarah pressed the down button and waited. Through the glass doors of Marcus's office, she could see him on the phone, speaking animatedly with someone. His body language was tense, defensive. She had seen him take calls from corporate before, and this wasn't how those conversations usually went. This looked personal. This looked scared. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding, and Sarah stepped inside. As the floors ticked down from the 4th floor to the ground level, she felt her journalistic instincts kicking in despite her shock. Something was very wrong with this picture. Marcus Webb had been at the Gazette for 23 years. He had survived 3 different ownership changes and countless budget crises. He didn't fire his best investigative reporter over money, especially not one who was about to break the biggest local story in years. The lobby of the Gazette building was all polished marble and corporate photos of award-winning front pages. Sarah's own byline appeared on at least a dozen of them. The security guard, Miguel, who had chatted with her every morning for the past 5 years, couldn't meet her eyes as she walked past his desk. "Take care, Miss Martinez," he mumbled without looking up from his computer screen. Outside, the October air was crisp and clean, a sharp contrast to the stale office atmosphere she had just left behind. Main Street was busy with the lunch crowd, people hurrying to restaurants and sandwich shops. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that the person responsible for keeping their local government honest had just been silenced. Sarah set her box on a nearby bench and pulled out her cell phone. She had 3 missed calls from David Chen, the planning department employee who was supposed to meet her that afternoon. The 4th call came through as she was checking her messages. "Sarah, thank God." David's voice was urgent, frightened. "We can't meet today. Something's happened." "They know about our meeting." "What do you mean they know?" "I mean, my supervisor called me into his office this morning and asked me point blank if I had been talking to reporters. He knew about the documents I copied. He knew everything." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October wind. David, where are you now?
I'm at home.
I took a sick day. Sarah, I think my phone might be tapped. I think they're watching me. So, who's watching you? I don't know, but this goes higher than I thought. The mayor's office called my boss directly. They mentioned you by name. The pieces were starting to fall into place. Sarah's investigation had been focused on the fast-tracked approval of the Pinnacle Development Group's massive shopping mall project. The proposed site was prime wetland that should have been protected, but somehow the environmental impact study had been rushed through in record time. The city council had approved the project unanimously, despite significant community opposition. What made it more suspicious was that Pinnacle was a shell company with no previous development experience. Their investors were hidden behind multiple layers of offshore corporations. Sarah had spent weeks tracing the money trail, and what she had found was disturbing. Several city council members had received significant campaign contributions from organizations that appeared to be connected to Pinnacle's hidden investors. David, I need those documents, she said into the phone. I can't. They searched my office this morning. Everything's gone. What about the copies you made? There was a long pause. I hid them. But Sarah, I don't think I can do this anymore. I have a family to think about. Sarah understood. Good. David was a middle-aged man with 2 kids and a mortgage. He couldn't afford to lose his job or worse. But without his evidence, her story was just speculation and circumstantial connections. I understand, she said. The book is gone. But David, if what we found is true, this is bigger than just one shopping mall. This is about whether our local government can be bought and sold. I know, he said quietly. I'll call you tomorrow. Maybe we can figure something out. The line went dead, leaving Sarah standing on the sidewalk with her cardboard box, and a growing sense that she had stumbled into something much larger and more dangerous than she had realized. She looked back up at the 4th-floor windows of the Gazette building. Marcus was standing at his office window looking down at her. When their eyes met, he quickly stepped back and disappeared from view. Sarah picked up her box and started walking toward her apartment 6 blocks away in the older part of town. The sidewalks were cracked and uneven, lined with mature oak trees that had already started dropping their autumn leaves. This had always been her favorite walk, a chance to decompress after long days chasing stories and deadlines. Today it felt different. Today it felt like she was walking away from her old life and towards something uncertain and potentially dangerous. 3 blocks from the Gazette building, Sarah noticed the black sedan parked across from the coffee shop where she usually stopped for her afternoon caffeine fix. There was someone sitting in the driver's seat, but she couldn't make out any details through the tinted windows. The car looked out of place in this neighborhood of aging Hondas and rusty pickup trucks. She kept walking, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger with each step. At the next intersection, she casually looked back and saw the sedan pulling slowly away from the curb, maintaining the same distance behind her. Her journalism training had taught her to notice details, and she made a mental note of the license plate number. The paranoia felt ridiculous at first. This was Millfield, population 47,000, not some big city where investigative reporters actually got threatened. The most dangerous thing that had ever happened to her on the job was getting yelled at by an angry school board member. But David's frightened voice echoed in her mind, and Marcus's strange behavior was completely out of character. By the 4th block, Sarah was certain she was being followed. The sedan had maintained the same distance behind her, stopping when she stopped, and accelerating when she picked up her pace. There was no way this was coincidental. She turned left onto Elm Street, taking a route that would add 2 blocks to her journey but would let her see if the car followed. It did. The sedan turned left as well, still maintaining its careful distance. Sarah's heart was beating faster now. The cardboard box in her arms suddenly felt heavy and awkward. Her apartment was still 8 blocks away, and the route would take her through increasingly residential areas where there would be fewer people around if something happened.
And then they ask you, what is your person doing there, which is what you're about at.
She ducked into Martina's Family Market, the small grocery store owned by her uncle Roberto. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, and Roberto looked up from the cash register with surprise. Sarah, what are you doing here in the middle of the day? And what's with the box? I got fired, she said, setting the box on the counter. Uncle Roberto, can I ask you a favor? Can you look outside and tell me if there's a black sedan parked on the street? Roberto's weathered face creased with concern. Why? What's going on? I think someone might be following me. I know it sounds crazy, but... It doesn't sound crazy, Roberto interrupted, moving to the front window. I see it. 4-door sedan, tinted windows, parked under the maple tree. License plate, I can't see it from here. Sarah felt a mix of validation and fear. She wasn't being paranoid. Someone was actually following her. Roberto, is there a back way out of here? Through the stockroom, but Sarah, maybe we should call the police. And tell them what? That someone is driving slowly behind me. They'll think I'm crazy. Roberto studied her face carefully. He had known Sarah since she was a little girl, and he could read her moods better than anyone. This is about a story, isn't it? You found something someone doesn't want found. Sarah nodded. I think so. But I'm not sure how big it is yet. Then you need to be careful. Real careful. He handed her his phone. Call your mother. Tell her what's happening. And take the back exit. I'll keep an eye on that car. Sarah used the stockroom exit to slip out behind the building. The alley was narrow and cluttered with dumpsters and delivery trucks, but it provided cover as she made her way toward her apartment building. She could circle around and approach from the opposite direction, which would tell her whether her followers were sophisticated enough to anticipate that move. The detour added 15 minutes to her journey, but it also confirmed her worst suspicions. When she finally approached her apartment building from the south side, she could see the black sedan parked across the street with a clear view of the front entrance. They weren't just following her randomly. They knew where she lived. Sarah's apartment was on the second floor of a converted Victorian house. Mrs. Patterson, her elderly landlord, lived on the first floor and knew everything that happened in the neighborhood. Sarah could get inside without being seen. She could figure out her next move. Stairs. One man in the aftermath of the back of the building, letting out her powder sash. 1-1 replace his whole phone. The metal stairs creaked ominously under her weight, but she made it to her window without incident. The apartment felt like a sanctuary, even though she knew it was probably being watched. Sarah set her box on the kitchen table and immediately called David back. The phone went straight to voicemail. She tried 3 more times over the next hour with the same result. Either his phone was dead, or he was no longer answering calls from her number. She spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing her notes and trying to piece together what she knew. The Pinnacle Development Group story was definitely bigger than she had initially thought, but without David's evidence, she couldn't prove anything. All she had were suspicious connections and circumstantial evidence that wouldn't hold up to editorial scrutiny, much less legal challenges. As evening approached, Sarah realized she hadn't eaten anything since breakfast. She was afraid to leave her apartment, but she also couldn't hide forever. Eventually, she would have to venture out into the world again. She was heating up leftover Chinese food when her doorbell rang. Through the peephole, she could see Mrs. Patterson standing in the hallway holding an envelope. Sarah, dear, this came for you this afternoon, the elderly woman said when Sarah opened the door. A young man dropped it off. Said it was important. The envelope was plain white with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typewritten message. Stop digging or you'll end up like David Chen. Sarah's blood went cold. She looked at Mrs. Patterson, who was studying her face with concern. Mrs. Patterson, when did this arrive exactly? About an hour ago. Nice young man, very polite. Said he worked with you at the newspaper. What did he look like? Clean-cut suit and tie. Dark hair. He seemed very professional. Sarah thanked her landlord and closed the door, her hands shaking as she read the note again. The implication was clear. Something had happened to David, and she was next if she didn't back off. She tried calling David again and again got voicemail. This time she left a message. David, it's Sarah. Please call me back immediately. I'm worried about you. Then she called the police. Detective Maria Santos had been with the Millfield Police Department for 12 years, and she had never seen a missing person case escalate so quickly. What started as a simple wellness check on David Chen had turned into a full-scale search operation within 6 hours. Sarah's call to the police had initially been dismissed as the paranoid concerns of a recently fired newspaper reporter. But when officers arrived at David's house for the requested wellness check, they found his front door standing wide open, his car in the driveway, and no sign of David anywhere. David's wife Lucy had returned from her job at the elementary school to find police cars in her driveway and neighbors gathering on the sidewalk. She hadn't spoken to David since their usual good morning phone call around 8:30 that morning. He had seemed nervous, she told Detective Santos, but she had attributed it to work stress. He's been worried about something at the office, Lucy explained, twisting her wedding ring nervously. He wouldn't tell me what, but he's been having trouble sleeping. Last week he started checking the locks on the doors twice before bed. Detective Santos made notes while other officers processed the scene. David's wallet and keys were still on the kitchen counter. His cell phone was found in the backyard. The screen cracked as if it had been thrown or dropped from a height. Most disturbing was the evidence of a struggle in the living room, an overturned lamp, scattered magazines, and scuff marks on the hardwood floor that suggested someone had been dragged. By 6 o'clock that evening, the search had expanded beyond the Chen house. Canine units were tracking scent trails through the neighborhood while police helicopters circled overhead with thermal imaging cameras. The entire situation had taken on an urgency that seemed disproportionate for a missing person case that was less than 12 hours old. Sarah watched the helicopters from her apartment window, feeling a growing sense of responsibility and guilt. She had convinced David to help with her investigation, and now he was missing. The threatening note in her hand felt like evidence of her complicity in whatever had happened to him. Detective Santos arrived at Sarah's apartment just after 7 o'clock. She was a compact woman in her 40s with intelligent dark eyes and an efficient manner that inspired immediate confidence. "Miss Martinez? I'm Detective Santos. I understand you called in the wellness check on David Chen." Sarah invited her in and offered coffee, which the detective accepted gratefully. The long day was showing on her face, and Sarah could see the genuine concern in her eyes. "Tell me about your relationship with Mr. Chen," Detective Santos said, settling into Sarah's small living room with her notebook. Sarah explained the investigation she had been working on, the meeting they had scheduled for that afternoon, and David's frightened phone call that morning. She showed the detective her research notes and the threatening note that had been delivered to her apartment. "You think his disappearance is connected to your newspaper investigation?" Detective Santos asked. "I know how it sounds, but yes." David was scared this morning. He said they knew about our meeting, that his supervisor had questioned him directly about talking to reporters. Detective Santos studied the threatening note carefully. "This came to your apartment this afternoon?" "About an hour before I called you. My landlord said a young man in a suit delivered it personally. We'll need to talk to your landlord and get a description. We'll also want to take this note for analysis." The detective placed the paper in an evidence bag. "Miss Martinez, I need to ask you this directly. Is there any possibility that Mr. Chen was romantically interested in you? That this could be a personal matter rather than professional?"
"No," Sarah said firmly.
"David is happily married. He has 2 kids. This was purely about the story I was investigating." Detective Santos made more notes. "Tell me about this Pinnacle Development Group." Sarah spent the next 30 minutes walking the detective through everything she had discovered about the shopping mall project. The rushed approval process, the hidden investors, the suspicious campaign contributions to city council members. As she spoke, she could see the detective's expression growing more serious. "Have you shared this information with anyone besides Mr. Chen?" "My editor, Marcus Webb. But when he fired me today, he told me to drop the story. He said some stories aren't worth telling. That's unusual, isn't it, for an editor to kill an investigation like that? Very unusual. Marcus has always encouraged aggressive reporting. Something changed between yesterday and today." Detective Santos closed her notebook and stood up. "Miss Martinez, I'm going to be honest with you. Based on what you've told me and what we found at the Chen house, I think you might be in danger. Is there somewhere you can stay tonight? Somewhere these people wouldn't think to look for you?" The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. The reality of the situation was finally sinking in. This wasn't just about a story anymore. David was missing, possibly hurt, and she might be next. "I can stay with my sister in the next town over," she said. "Good. Pack a bag and leave tonight. Don't tell anyone where you're going, and don't use your credit cards or cell phone unless it's an emergency. We'll post an officer here tonight in case anyone comes looking for you." After Detective Santos left, Sarah packed quickly and efficiently. She had covered enough crime stories to know what being careful meant in a situation like this. She took cash from her emergency fund, grabbed her laptop and research files, and called her sister Elena from Mrs. Patterson's landline. "Sarah, why are you calling from Mrs. Patterson's number?" Elena's voice was puzzled. "It's a long story. Can I stay with you tonight? I'll explain when I get there." "Of course. Are you okay?" "I will be. I'll drive over after dark." Sarah waited until 9:30 before leaving her apartment. She used the fire escape again, carrying her overnight bag and laptop case. Her car was parked in the alley behind the building, and she approached it carefully, checking for any signs that it had been tampered with. The drive to Elena's house in the neighboring town of Riverside took 45 minutes on back roads that avoided the main highway. Sarah kept checking her rearview mirror, but she didn't see any signs of being followed. The familiar landscape of farmland in small towns usually calmed her, but tonight, every shadow seemed threatening. Elena lived in a small ranch house with her husband Mike and their 2 young children. She was Sarah's older sister by 3 years, a nurse at the regional hospital who had always been the practical one in the family. When Sarah arrived, Elena took one look at her face and immediately poured 2 glasses of wine. Start from the beginning, Elena said. Sarah told the whole story, from her investigation of Pinnacle Development Group to David's disappearance to the threatening note. Elena listened without interruption, her nurse's training evident in her calm, analytical response to the crisis. So someone doesn't want this shopping mall story to come out, Elena said when Sarah finished. What exactly did you find that's worth kidnapping someone over? That's what I can't figure out. It's a lot of money. The project is worth about $50 million, but it's not like I found evidence of murder or anything. Just corruption and payoffs. $50 million is a lot of money, Sarah. People have killed for a lot less. They sat in Elena's kitchen, talking quietly while Mike put the children to bed upstairs. Through the window, they could see the distant glow of Millfield's lights about 10 miles away. Somewhere in that direction, police helicopters were still searching for David Chen. What are you going to do? Elena asked. I don't know. Without David's evidence, I can't prove any of my suspicions. And I don't have a job anymore, so I can't publish the story anyway. Maybe that's for the best. Maybe you should just let this go. Sarah understood her sister's concern, but the journalist in her rebelled against the idea of giving up. Elena, if I'm right about this, it means our local government is completely corrupt. It means they can approve anything they want as long as the right people get paid. What happens to the next project or the one after that? What happens to you if you keep digging? What happens if you end up like David? It was a fair question, and Sarah didn't have a good answer. She was scared, exhausted, and running out of options. But she also couldn't shake the feeling that David's disappearance was her fault, and that backing down now would be a betrayal of everything she believed in as a journalist. Around midnight, Elena's landline phone rang. Elena answered with a worried frown. Few people called after 10 o'clock unless there was an emergency. Sarah, it's for you, Elena said, holding out the phone with a puzzled expression. Someone asking for Sarah Martinez. Sarah took the phone cautiously. Hello? Sarah, thank God I found you. It was Detective Santos, and her voice was tight with stress. How did you know to call this number? I called your sister's house, your mother, your Uncle Roberto. Elena was the only one who admitted you were staying there. What's wrong? Did you find David? No, but we found his car. It was dumped in the river about 15 miles outside town. The car's totaled, but there's no body. We also found blood in the trunk. Sarah felt dizzy. She sat down heavily in Elena's kitchen chair, gripping the phone tightly. Sarah, are you there? Yes, I'm here. How much blood? Enough to indicate serious injury, but not enough to suggest fatal blood loss.
We think David might still be alive, but he's definitely hurt and definitely being held against his will.
This is because of me. This is because I convinced him to help with the story. Sarah, listen to me. This is not your fault. Someone is willing to kidnap and possibly kill to keep this story quiet, which means the story is important. We need your help to find David and bring these people to justice. Sarah looked at Elena, who was listening to the one-sided conversation with growing alarm. What kind of help? We need everything you have on the Pinnacle Development Group. Every document, every note, every connection you found. We're treating this as a kidnapping case now, which means we have resources we didn't have this morning. Detective, there's something I should tell you. I think my editor might be involved somehow. The timing of my firing was too convenient, and his behavior was completely out of character. We'll look into that too. But right now, I need you to stay where you are and stay safe. Tomorrow morning, I want you to come to the station and go through everything with our investigation team. After hanging up, Sarah sat in Elena's kitchen feeling overwhelmed by the weight of responsibility. A man was missing, possibly dying, because she had asked for his help with a newspaper story about a shopping mall. The proportions seemed all wrong, the consequences too severe for the apparent crime. Sarah, what did she say? Elena asked. Sarah repeated the detective's update about David's car and the blood evidence. Elena's nursing experience had taught her to deal with medical emergencies, but this kind of violence was outside her realm of expertise. Maybe you should call Mom and Dad, Elena suggested. And tell them what? That I might have gotten someone killed over a newspaper story? That someone might be trying to kill me too? Tell them the truth. Tell them you need help. Sarah's parents lived in Florida now. Retired. And enjoying their golden years. Her father had been a police officer for 30 years before retiring, and her mother had been a high school principal. They were practical, sensible people who would drop everything to help her, but Sarah hated the idea of dragging them into this situation. Let me get through tomorrow first, she said. Maybe the police will find David, and maybe this will all be resolved quickly. But even as she said it, Sarah suspected that things were going to get worse before they got better. Someone with enough power and resources to kidnap a city planning department employee wasn't going to give up just because the police were involved. If anything, they were probably planning their next move right now. Elena made up the couch for Sarah and provided her with extra blankets and pillows. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling wood. Sarah lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the day and trying to make sense of what had happened. 12 hours ago, she had been an employed journalist working on what seemed like a routine corruption story. Now she was an unemployed woman hiding in her sister's house while police helicopters searched for her missing source. The transformation was so complete and so sudden that it felt like someone else's life. Around 2 a.m, Sarah heard a car driving slowly past Elena's house. The engine was quiet, almost stealthy, and the car seemed to pause at the end of the driveway before continuing down the road. Sarah got up quietly and peered through the front window, but she couldn't see anything in the darkness. 5 minutes later, the same car came back, this time from the opposite direction. Again, it paused near the driveway before driving away. Sarah woke Elena and told her about the car.
Elena called the Riverside police, who said they would send a patrol car to check the area.
Within 10 minutes, Sarah could see police lights flashing as an officer drove slowly through the neighborhood.
The patrol officer found nothing suspicious, but the incident left both sisters too nervous to sleep. They spent the rest of the night taking turns watching the windows and drinking coffee in Elena's kitchen. As dawn broke over Riverside, Sarah could see the distant smudge of smoke on the horizon in the direction of Millfield. Elena turned on the local news while they ate breakfast, and the lead story made Sarah's blood run cold. The offices of the Millfield Gazette were destroyed by fire early this morning, the anchor reported. Fire investigators are calling the blaze suspicious, and police say it may be connected to the ongoing search for missing city employee David Chen. The camera showed the gutted remains of the building where Sarah had worked for 11 years. The 4th floor, where the newsroom had been, was completely destroyed. Marcus Webb stood in the parking lot being interviewed by reporters from competing news outlets, his face haggard and shocked. "We lost everything," he was saying. 11 years of archives, all our computer systems. Everything. Sarah knew that. Everything included her research files on the Pinnacle Development Group. Someone had made sure that every piece of evidence from her investigation was now destroyed. The message was clear. The story was dead. David was missing, and Sarah was next if she didn't get the message. But as Sarah watched her former workplace burn on television, she felt something unexpected rising in her chest. It wasn't fear or despair, it was anger. Pure, focused anger at whoever thought they could silence the truth with intimidation and violence. For the first time since this nightmare began, Sarah Martinez knew exactly what she was going to do. Sarah stared at her laptop screen in Elena's guest bedroom, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she tried to recreate months of research from memory. The Millfield Gazette fire had destroyed her physical files, but whoever had ordered the arson had underestimated her. Every good investigative reporter had backup plans, and Sarah had been emailing copies of key documents to her personal account for weeks. It was 9 a.m, 2 hours after watching her former workplace burn on television. Detective Santos was expecting her at the police station, but first Sarah wanted to recover as much of her investigation as possible. The anger that had ignited when she saw the fire was now channeled into systematic determination. She started with the financial records she had obtained through public records requests. The Pinnacle Development Group was incorporated in Delaware but listed a mailbox in the Cayman Islands as its business address. The company had no website, no previous development projects, and no identifiable employees beyond a registered agent who turned out to be a law firm that specialized in creating shell companies. The money trail was deliberately complex. Pinnacle's funding came from Meridian Holdings, which was owned by Apex Capital Management, which was controlled by Offshore Ventures Limited. Each company was incorporated in a different jurisdiction with strict privacy laws. Sarah had spent weeks untangling the connections, and she was beginning to see the pattern again. What made the whole scheme interesting was the timeline. Pinnacle Development Group had been incorporated just 6 weeks before submitting their proposal for the Millfield shopping mall project. It was as if the company had been created specifically for this one deal. Sarah cross-referenced the incorporation dates with campaign contribution records from the Secretary of State's office. 3 members of the Millfield City Council had received significant donations in the months leading up to the Pinnacle approval. The donations came from something called the Economic Development PAC, which was funded by many of the same offshore entities connected to Pinnacle. She was deep in financial records when Elena knocked on the guest room door. "Sarah, there's a Detective Santos on the phone. She says you missed your appointment." Sarah looked at the clock and realized she had been working for 3 hours straight. It was already noon and she had completely lost track of time. "Tell her I'll be there in an hour," Sarah said. But as she prepared to leave for the police station, Sarah's phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize, but something made her answer it. "Sarah Martinez?" The voice was male, older, with a slight accent she couldn't place. "Who is this?" "My name is Thomas Reinhardt. I'm calling about David Chen." Sarah's heart stopped. "Do you know where he is? Is he okay?" "He's alive but hurt. He's in a secure location where he can't be found by the people who took him." "Who are you? How do I know you're telling the truth?" "Because David told me to tell you about the red notebook. He said you would understand." Sarah nearly dropped the phone. David had mentioned a red notebook during one of their meetings. It contained his handwritten copies of the documents he had found in the planning department files. She had never seen it, and David hadn't mentioned it to anyone else. "Where's David?" "I want to talk to him. That's not possible right now. He's recovering from his injuries and can't be moved. But he wanted me to tell you that the story is bigger than you realized. Much bigger." "What do you mean?" "The Pinnacle Development Group is just one small piece of a much larger operation. The shopping mall project is designed to fail." Sarah felt dizzy. "What do you mean fail? Think about it. A $50 million shopping mall in a town of 47,000 people built on protected wetlands that will require constant expensive maintenance. The mall is designed to go bankrupt within 2 years, which will trigger a massive insurance claim and tax write-off. Meanwhile, the real money is made through construction contracts and the illegal sale of wetland permits to other developers. The pieces were falling into place." Sarah had been focused on the corruption involved in getting the project approved, but she hadn't considered that the project itself might be fraudulent. "Who are you?" she asked again. "I'm someone who's been watching this organization for a long time. David stumbled into something much bigger than local corruption. This group has been operating in small towns across the region using the same shell company structure to defraud local governments and insurance companies. Why should I trust you? Because if you don't, David dies, and you're next." "Sarah, the people behind this have killed before. They've made David disappear, they've burned down your newspaper, and they're watching your family. Your sister Elena received a flower delivery this morning that she didn't order. They know where you are." Sarah's blood went cold. "Are you threatening me? I'm warning you. These people don't leave loose ends. You have information they need to disappear, and they will do whatever it takes to silence you permanently."
What information?
"My research was destroyed in the fire. Not all of it. David told them you had copies, which is why they haven't killed you yet. They're hoping to find out what you have and where you've hidden it before they eliminate you." Sarah looked out Elena's guest room window at the quiet suburban street. Everything looked normal. Kids riding bikes, neighbors walking dogs, mail carriers making their rounds. But now she wondered which of those ordinary-looking people might be watching her. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "Meet me tonight. I'll show you evidence that will blow this whole thing open. But you have to come alone, and you can't tell the police. I'm working with the police." Detective Santos is a good cop, but there are people in the Millfield Police Department who can't be trusted. Someone told the kidnappers about David's cooperation with your investigation." "Someone with inside access to the investigation." Sarah's mind raced. She had assumed that David's leak had come from his workplace, but what if the corruption went deeper? What if someone in law enforcement was involved? "How do I know this isn't a trap?" "You don't. But David made me promise to help you if anything happened to him. He said you were the only reporter he trusted to tell the story the right way." The caller gave her instructions for a meeting that evening at an abandoned grain silo outside of town. He hung up before she could ask any more questions, leaving Sarah staring at her phone and trying to process what she had just heard. Elena found her sitting on the bed 20 minutes later, still holding the phone. "Sarah, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Elena, did you receive flowers this morning?"
Yes, actually.
"A beautiful arrangement from someone called Midwest Florists. I thought it was strange because I didn't recognize the name and the card just said thinking of you. I assumed it was a mistake." "Where are the flowers now?" "In the living room." "Why?" Sarah felt sick. The flowers were a message. They had found Elena's house, and they wanted Sarah to know it. "Elena, I need you to pack a bag and take the kids somewhere safe, maybe to Mike's parents' house. Don't tell me where you're going, and don't use your credit cards or cell phone." "Sarah, you're scaring me. What's going on?" Sarah explained the phone call and the implied threat. Elena's nursing training had taught her to stay calm in emergencies, but she was clearly frightened by the scope of what her sister had gotten involved in. "Come with us," Elena said. "Whatever this is, it's not worth dying for. I can't. David is missing because he tried to help me. If I run away now, he dies. If you get killed, he dies anyway." It was a valid point, but Sarah had made her decision. She had spent her entire career believing that journalism mattered, that truth was worth fighting for, and that holding powerful people accountable was essential to democracy. If she backed down now, she would never be able to live with herself. "Elena, there's something else. I think someone in the police department might be involved. I can't trust anyone in authority right now." "Then what are you going to do?" "Meet with this Thomas Reinhardt person and see what he knows. Might be a trap, but it might also be the only way to save David and expose the truth." Elena helped Sarah pack a different bag, one that included a flashlight, pepper spray, and a small digital recorder. They agreed on a communication plan. Sarah would call Elena from a payphone at midnight. If Elena didn't hear from her by then, she would contact the FBI field office in the state capital. Before leaving Elena's house, Sarah called Detective Santos from a payphone at a gas station. "Sarah, where the hell are you? You missed our appointment, and I've been trying to reach you all day. Detective, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Is there anyone in your department who might have connections to the Pinnacle Development Group?" There was a long pause. "Why are you asking?" "Because someone knew about my investigation before David disappeared. Someone with access to police information told the kidnappers that David was cooperating with me. Sarah, you need to come in. We can protect you." "Can you? Because someone just told me that David is being held by people who have killed before, and that I'm next on their list." "Who told you that?" Sarah hesitated. If there really was a leak in the police department, telling Detective Santos about Thomas Reinhardt might be signing both their death warrants. "I can't tell you that right now, but Detective, I need you to check something for me. Find out who had access to information about David's cooperation with my investigation. Find out who knew about our scheduled meeting yesterday." "Sarah, this is not how investigations work. You can't just..." "Detective, someone burned down my newspaper, kidnapped my source, and is now threatening my family. The normal rules don't apply anymore." Sarah hung up before Detective Santos could respond. She felt bad about keeping information from the police, but she couldn't risk David's life on the assumption that everyone in law enforcement could be trusted. The abandoned grain silo where she was supposed to meet Thomas Reinhardt was located on a county road, about 15 miles outside of town. Sarah had driven past it many times over the years. It was a relic from the area's agricultural past, a concrete tower surrounded by rusted equipment and overgrown with weeds. It was also completely isolated, which made it either the perfect place for a clandestine meeting or the perfect place for an ambush. Sarah spent the afternoon researching everything she could find about insurance fraud in the construction industry. The more she learned, the more Thomas Reinhardt's explanation made sense. Fraudulent development projects were a growing problem, especially in small towns where oversight was minimal, and local officials could be more easily corrupted. The typical scheme involved creating a shell company to win a development contract, inflating construction costs, cutting corners on environmental compliance, and then allowing the project to fail in a way that triggered maximum insurance payouts. The developers would disappear with millions of dollars while leaving the local community with environmental damage and debt. If that was what Pinnacle Development Group was planning for Millfield, then Sarah's investigation had threatened to expose a multi-million-dollar fraud. That would certainly be worth kidnapping and murder to protect. As evening approached, Sarah drove toward the grain silo using back roads and constantly checking her mirrors for signs of being followed. The October sun was setting behind the rolling farmland, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded her of childhood autumns when the world had seemed safe and predictable. The grain silo came into view just as the last light was fading from the sky. Sarah parked her car behind a stand of trees about a quarter-mile away and walked the rest of the distance, carrying a flashlight and her digital recorder. The area was completely quiet except for the sound of wind through dry corn stalks in the surrounding fields. Thomas Reinhardt was waiting for her inside the grain silo, a tall man in his 60s with silver hair and intelligent eyes. He looked like a college professor or retired businessman, not someone involved in dangerous criminal investigations. "Miss Martinez, thank you for coming. I know this must be difficult for you. Where's David? I want proof that he's okay." Reinhardt handed her a cell phone. "Press the speed dial. David wanted to talk to you." David's voice was weak but unmistakably real. "Sarah? Thank God. Are you okay? David, where are you?" "What happened? I can't tell you where I am, but I'm safe for now. Sarah, Listen to me. The story is huge. Pinnacle Development Group has done this in at least 6 other towns. They've stolen hundreds of millions of dollars. Are you hurt? Some bruises and a concussion, but I'll be fine. Sarah, they have a list. A list of journalists and government officials who've been asking questions about their projects. Your name is on it. Sarah felt cold fear wash over her. How many names? 17. 3 of them are marked resolved. I think that means those people are dead. Thomas Reinhardt took the phone back before Sarah could ask more questions. David is being protected by people who've been investigating this organization for years, he explained. Federal agents who've been working undercover to build a case against the entire network. Your federal agents? I can't confirm or deny that, but I can tell you that your investigation has provided crucial evidence that will help us bring down this entire operation. The problem is that they know about your evidence, and they're planning to eliminate you tonight. Tonight? Sarah, you need to disappear. Completely. New identity, new location, everything. It's the only way to stay alive long enough for us to make our arrests. Sarah stared at him. You're asking me to give up my entire life. I'm asking you to stay alive. This organization has resources and connections that go far beyond Millfield. They have people in local law enforcement, state government, and federal contracting agencies. They've been operating for years without being caught because they eliminate threats quickly and efficiently. What about Detective Santos? Can she be trusted? Detective Santos is honest, but her department has been compromised. Someone there is feeding information to the organization. We haven't identified who yet. Sarah thought about Elena and her children, about her parents in Florida, about the life she had built in Millfield over the past 11 years. The idea of walking away from everything was terrifying, but the alternative was worse. What happens to David? David will be safe as long as he stays hidden. Once we make our arrests, he can come forward as a witness. And what happens to the story? What happens to holding these people accountable? Thomas Reinhardt smiled for the first time since she had met him. Miss Martinez, you're going to write the biggest story of your career. But first, we need to keep you alive long enough to write it. In the distance, Sarah could hear the sound of helicopters approaching. But this time she knew they weren't searching for David Chen. They were searching for her. The helicopters were definitely heading toward the grain silo. Sarah could see their searchlights sweeping across the cornfields, creating moving pools of white light in the darkness. Thomas Reinhardt was already on his radio, speaking in coded phrases that Sarah couldn't understand. We need to move now, he said, grabbing a black duffel bag from behind some old machinery. Are those police helicopters? Sarah asked as they hurried toward a back exit from the grain silo. Supposedly, but we can't be sure who's really controlling them. They emerged from the grain silo into a landscape transformed by artificial daylight. The helicopter searchlights were sweeping systematically across the area, and Sarah could hear the sound of vehicles approaching on the access road. Whatever was happening, it was a major operation. Thomas led her through a gap in a chain-link fence and into the cornfield beyond. The dried stalks were tall enough to provide cover, but they also created a rustling sound with every step that seemed impossibly loud in the night air. Stay low and follow me, Thomas whispered. There's a car waiting about half a mile from here. They moved through the cornfield as quickly as they could while staying hidden. Behind them, Sarah could hear vehicles arriving at the grain silo and the sound of people shouting orders. Flashlight beams were visible through the corn stalks, searching in their direction. Thomas, who are these people? Are they police or the people who took David? I honestly don't know, he said grimly. That's the problem with this investigation. We don't know how deep the corruption goes. They reached the edge of the cornfield and found themselves at a gravel road. A dark sedan was waiting with its engine running. Thomas opened the passenger door and motioned for Sarah to get in. The driver was a woman about Sarah's age, with short blonde hair and alert eyes that constantly scanned the mirrors. She was wearing a bulletproof vest over a dark sweatshirt, and there was a pistol visible in a shoulder holster. This is Agent Rebecca Walsh, Thomas said as he got into the back seat. Rebecca meets Sarah Martinez. Agent Walsh pulled away from the gravel road without turning on the headlights. She seemed to know exactly where she was going, taking a series of back roads that kept them away from the main highways. Miss Martinez, we need to get you somewhere safe while we figure out who just tried to grab you, Agent Walsh said. Who do you think it was? Could be local police acting on bad information. Could be the people who took David Chen. Could be federal agents who don't know about our operation. Science. In a situation like this, everyone looks like a potential threat. Sarah was beginning to understand the complexity of what she had stumbled into. This wasn't just about a corrupt shopping mall project in a small town. This was about a criminal organization that had infiltrated multiple levels of government and law enforcement. Agent Walsh, how long have you been investigating these people? 3 years. We first noticed the pattern when insurance companies started reporting unusual claims related to failed development projects in small towns. Always the same structure: shell companies, environmental shortcuts, projects that failed right on schedule. How many towns? At least 12 that we know of, probably more. They target places with populations between 20,000 and 50,000. Big enough to support major development projects. Small enough that local oversight is minimal. They drove in silence for several minutes, the only sounds being the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of radio chatter from Agent Walsh's communication equipment. Sarah could see that they were heading generally north, away from both Millfield and Elena's house in Riverside. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked. "Safe house about 2 hours from here," Thomas said. "Federal facility where we can debrief you properly and plan our next moves." "What about my sister and her family?" "They're being protected. We moved them to a secure location this afternoon after we learned about the flower delivery." Sarah felt a mix of relief and guilt. Elena and her children were safe, but they had been uprooted from their lives because of Sarah's investigation. The collateral damage was spreading, and Sarah wondered how many more people would be affected before this was over. Agent Walsh's radio crackled with an urgent transmission. Sarah couldn't understand the coded language, but she could tell from the tone that something important was happening. "Thomas, we've got a problem," Agent Walsh said after responding to the radio call. "What kind of problem?" "Local police just found your car, Miss Martinez. They're treating it as evidence in a kidnapping case. But I wasn't kidnapped. I left voluntarily. They don't know that. Someone called in a report that you were seen being forced into a vehicle at the grain silo. They think you've been abducted." Sarah realized the implications immediately. "Detective Santos thinks I'm missing, which means every law enforcement agency in the region is now looking for you," Thomas said. "Including people who might be working for the organization we're investigating. Can't you contact Detective Santos and explain? We can't be sure she's clean. For all we know, she's the one who's been feeding information to the kidnappers." Agent Walsh took a sharp turn onto a dirt road that led into a heavily wooded area. The safe house was apparently more remote than Sarah had expected. "Miss Martinez, I need to ask you something important," Agent Walsh said. "In your investigation of Pinnacle Development Group, did you find any connections to federal contracts or projects?"
Not directly, but some of the offshore companies in their ownership structure have names that sound like military contractors.
Apex Capital Management, Meridian Holdings. They sound like defense industry companies. "That's because they are," Thomas said grimly. "This organization doesn't just defraud local governments and insurance companies. They also have contracts with the Department of Defense, the Department of Homeland Security, and several other federal agencies." "What kind of contracts?" "Construction and environmental cleanup at military bases. Emergency response coordination for natural disasters. Border security infrastructure. Billions of dollars in federal money that's very difficult to track or audit." Sarah felt overwhelmed by the scope of what she was hearing. What had started as a story about a shopping mall in a small town was now revealing connections to federal contracting fraud on a massive scale. "How does it all connect?" "The same shell company structure they use for local development projects," Agent Walsh explained. "They win federal contracts through competitive bidding, but the companies that actually do the work are all owned by the same offshore entities. They inflate costs, cut corners on specifications, and pocket the difference. And they eliminate anyone who gets too close to exposing them." Exactly. The safe house turned out to be a modest cabin in a state forest preserve. It looked like a typical hunting lodge from the outside, but Sarah could see security cameras and sophisticated communication equipment that suggested its real purpose. Inside, the cabin was set up like a command center. Multiple computer workstations lined one wall, and there were maps, charts, and photographs covering most of the available wall space. Sarah recognized some of the faces in the photographs: Marcus Webb, several members of the Millfield City Council, and people she didn't recognize but who were apparently connected to the broader investigation. "Miss Martinez, welcome to Operation Clean House," Thomas said as they settled into chairs around a conference table.
Clean House? Our code name for this investigation. We've been building a case against this organization for 3 years, and we're finally close to making arrests.
Your investigation provided some of the missing pieces we needed. Agent Walsh opened a laptop and pulled up a series of financial documents. "Your research into the Pinnacle Development Group helped us confirm connections we suspected but couldn't prove. The shell company structure, the offshore banking relationships, the pattern of campaign contributions. It all fits with what we found in other locations." But your investigation also exposed our operation to the targets, Thomas added. They know someone is looking at them systematically now, which has forced them to accelerate their timeline.
What do you mean? They're planning to disappear?
Liquidate their assets, eliminate any witnesses, and vanish completely. We estimate they have maybe a week before they're gone forever.
Sarah stared at the documents and photographs surrounding her. 3 years of federal investigation, millions of dollars in suspected fraud, and potentially dozens of victims.
The responsibility felt crushing. What do you need from me? Everything, Agent Walsh said.
Every document, every connection, every conversation you had with David Chen. We need to understand exactly what you discovered and how you discovered it.
Sarah spent the next 4 hours going through her investigation step by step. She shared the documents she had saved to her personal email account, walked them through her research methodology, and explained every connection she had found between the various shell companies and local officials. As she talked, the federal agents took notes and asked detailed questions. They were particularly interested in David's access to internal planning department documents and the timeline of events leading up to his disappearance. David mentioned a red notebook, Sarah said.
He said it contained handwritten copies of documents he had found. Did you recover it?
We did, Thomas said, pulling a small red notebook from his duffel bag. David had hidden it in his attic before he was taken. It contains photocopies of internal memos between planning department officials and representatives of Pinnacle Development Group. Sarah flipped through the notebook, seeing David's careful handwriting documenting conversations and meetings that had never been made public. The memos showed that planning department officials knew about environmental problems with the proposed mall site but had been instructed to approve the project anyway.
This is proof of conspiracy, Sarah said. It's proof of local conspiracy, Agent Walsh corrected.
But we need to connect it to the federal fraud before we can make arrests. That's where your investigation becomes crucial. How? Because you found the connections between the local shell companies and the federal contracting network. Without those connections, this looks like simple local corruption. With them, it becomes a federal racketeering case. Thomas showed Sarah an organizational chart that covered an entire wall of the cabin. It showed connections between dozens of companies, hundreds of individuals, and government agencies across multiple states. The Pinnacle Development Group was just one small corner of a vast criminal enterprise.
Miss Martinez, you've uncovered the tip of the iceberg, Thomas said. This organization has been stealing from American taxpayers for at least 5 years. Conservative estimates put their total take at over $2 billion.
$2 billion. Federal contracts are much more lucrative than local development projects.
A single military base cleanup contract can be worth $100 million. And there's much less oversight than you'd expect. Sarah studied the organizational chart, trying to understand the full scope of what she was looking at. Names, companies, bank accounts, government contracts. It was like a roadmap of systematic corruption. What happens now? Now we wait, Agent Walsh said. We've got surveillance teams watching key figures in the organization, and we're monitoring their communications. We think they're planning something big in the next few days. What kind of something big? We're not sure. But based on their communication patterns, they're either planning to disappear completely or eliminate everyone who poses a threat to their operation. Including me? Especially you. Miss Martinez, your investigation was the first time anyone connected their local operations to their federal contracting network. You represent an existential threat to their entire enterprise. As if to emphasize the point, Agent Walsh's radio crackled with an urgent transmission. She listened intently, then turned to Thomas with a grave expression. We've got a problem. Local police just found Detective Santos. Found her where? In her car in the river. Same location where they found David Chen's car. Sarah felt the room spinning around her. Detective Santos had been trying to help her and now she was dead. Was she? She's alive, but barely. Looks like the same people who took David tried to kill her too. Thomas was already reaching for his equipment.
Rebecca, we need to move.
If they're targeting law enforcement directly, then they're in the endgame phase. Move where? Sarah asked. Somewhere even more secure. Miss Martinez, I'm afraid your situation just became much more dangerous.
Outside the cabin, Sarah could hear the sound of helicopters approaching again. But this time, she wasn't sure if they were coming to rescue her or to finish what had been started at the grain silo.
The helicopters circling the safe house were federal law enforcement, but that didn't make Sarah feel any safer. Agent Walsh was speaking rapidly into her radio, while Thomas gathered equipment and files with practiced efficiency. Through the cabin windows, Sarah could see armed figures rappelling from the helicopters and taking positions around the perimeter. What's happening? Sarah asked, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. The operation has been compromised, Thomas said grimly. Someone tipped off the organization that we're close to making arrests. They're accelerating their endgame. Agent Walsh finished her radio conversation and turned to them. We've got multiple situations developing simultaneously. Detective Santos is in surgery, but stable. David Chen's location has been compromised, and we're moving him to a new safe house.
And we just intercepted communications suggesting that the organization is planning to eliminate all potential witnesses tonight. All witnesses. Everyone connected to the Pinnacle Development Group investigation. Local officials, planning department employees, anyone who might testify against them. The magnitude of what they were facing hit Sarah like a physical blow.
An entire criminal organization was preparing to commit mass murder to protect itself, and she was at the center of it. How many people are we talking about? At least 12 in Millfield alone.
Maybe more, depending on how paranoid they've become. Thomas was packing the red notebook and other evidence into a reinforced briefcase. Sarah, we're moving you to federal protection. Complete lockdown until we can make our arrests.
What about the story? What about holding these people accountable? First we keep you alive, then we worry about justice. But Sarah had spent 3 years of journalism school and 11 years in the field believing that the story always came first. The idea of hiding in federal protection while a criminal organization murdered potential witnesses was intolerable. No, she said firmly. No, I'm not hiding anymore. These people kidnapped David, tried to kill Detective Santos, burned down my newspaper, and now they're planning to murder innocent people to protect their profits. I'm not running away. Agent Walsh stared at her. Miss Martinez, you don't understand the level of resources these people have.
They have military-grade weapons, trained personnel, and connections throughout law enforcement. This isn't a game.
You're right, it's not a game. It's journalism. And my job as a journalist is to expose the truth, not hide from it. Thomas and Agent Walsh exchanged a look that Sarah couldn't interpret.
Outside, she could hear helicopters landing and taking off, the sound of urgent activity as the federal response escalated. Sarah, what exactly are you proposing? Thomas asked.
I'm proposing we get this story out immediately, tonight, before they can kill anyone else. Even if we could do that, no news organization would publish a story this complex without weeks of verification. Sarah pulled out her laptop. Then I'll publish it myself. Social media, blog posts, email to every journalist in the state. Make it impossible to suppress. That's assuming you can get online and stay alive long enough to write it. Agent Walsh's radio crackled again. The transmission was urgent and lengthy, and Sarah could see the expression on the agent's face growing more concerned. What now? Thomas asked. Marcus Webb is dead. Sarah felt like she had been punched in the stomach. Marcus had fired her, but he had also been her mentor for 11 years. She had suspected he was being coerced, but she had hoped he could be saved. How? Apparent suicide. He left a note confessing to accepting bribes from Pinnacle Development Group and expressing remorse for getting Sarah involved. That's convenient, Thomas said sarcastically. Too convenient. Forensics team says the handwriting doesn't match his normal style and there are defensive wounds on his hands. Sarah sat down heavily. Marcus Webb was dead. Detective Santos was fighting for her life. David Chen was in hiding, and an unknown number of other people were marked for elimination. The human cost of this story was becoming unbearable. How many people have to die? She whispered. As many as it takes to protect $2 billion, Agent Walsh said bluntly. Miss Martinez, these aren't local criminals who got in over their heads. This is an organization with the resources and ruthlessness of a small military force. Then why haven't you arrested them already? Because until your investigation, we couldn't prove the connection between their local operations and their federal contracting fraud. We had pieces of the puzzle, but not enough to secure convictions. Thomas opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Sarah, I need to show you something. This investigation is bigger than just financial fraud. The folder contained photographs and documents that made Sarah's head spin. Military equipment supposedly destroyed in Afghanistan but actually sold to private militias. Environmental cleanup contracts for sites that were never actually cleaned up. Emergency response coordination that diverted federal disaster relief supplies to black market sales. They're not just stealing money, Thomas explained. They're undermining national security and public safety for profit. Why are you showing me this? Because you're right about getting the story out immediately. We can't wait for a normal investigation and trial process. Too many people will die, and too much evidence will disappear. Agent Walsh was monitoring multiple radio frequencies, coordinating with teams across the region. Thomas, we've got reports of armed vehicles moving toward Millfield. Multiple targets are being hit simultaneously. What kind of targets? Planning department employees, city council members, anyone connected to the Pinnacle approval process. Sarah grabbed her laptop and started typing. Give me everything you can legally share.
I'm writing this story now. For the next 2 hours, Sarah worked with an intensity and focus she had never experienced before. Thomas and Agent Walsh provided her with documents, background information, and context while maintaining communication with federal teams across the region.
The story that emerged was bigger and more complex than anything she had ever imagined. The Pinnacle Development Group was a front for an organization called Meridian Enterprises, which had been systematically defrauding federal agencies for at least 5 years. They used the same shell company structure for both local development projects and federal contracts, allowing them to move money between different operations and hide their true scale. The organization had infiltrated local governments in at least 12 states, federal contracting offices in Washington, D.C., and even some oversight agencies that were supposed to be monitoring them. They had stolen conservative estimates of $2 billion in taxpayer money while compromising national security and environmental protection. But what made the story even more compelling was the human element. David Chen was a planning department employee who had stumbled onto the local operation and tried to do the right thing. Detective Santos was an honest cop who had been trying to protect Sarah and find David. Marcus Webb was an editor who had been coerced into silence and then murdered when he became a liability. As Sarah wrote, reports continued to come in from federal teams monitoring the situation.
3 planning department employees had been found dead in what appeared to be home invasion robberies. 2 city council members had died in car accidents that looked suspicious.
The organization was systematically eliminating potential witnesses, just as Thomas had predicted. They're not even trying to make it look accidental anymore, Agent Walsh reported.
This is open warfare. How long before they come for me? They're probably already looking. But they don't know about this facility, and we've got security in place. Sarah finished her first draft as dawn was breaking over the state forest. The story was 12,000 words long and documented the entire criminal enterprise from the local Pinnacle Development Group project to the massive federal contracting fraud. She had included copies of key documents, organizational charts, and a detailed timeline of events. Now what, she asked. Thomas was on a secure phone speaking with federal prosecutors in Washington, D.C. Now we coordinate the story release, with simultaneous arrests across multiple states.
We've got teams ready to move on key targets, but we need your story to create public pressure and prevent them from disappearing.
Sarah uploaded her story to a secure server and prepared to send it simultaneously to news organizations, government oversight agencies, and social media platforms. The plan was to make the information so widely available that it would be impossible to suppress or discredit. But as she prepared to hit the send button, Agent Walsh grabbed her arm. Wait, we're getting reports of federal agents approaching this facility, but we didn't request backup. Through the cabin windows they could see vehicles approaching on the access road, black SUVs with government plates, but somehow they didn't look like the legitimate federal response.
Those aren't our people, Thomas said, reaching for his weapon. Then, who are they? Probably the organization's people using federal credentials.
This whole operation may have been compromised from the beginning. Sarah realized that her worst fears were about to be realized. After everything she had been through, after all the people who had died trying to protect her and expose the truth, the criminal organization had found her. Thomas, can you delay them?
For maybe 10 minutes.
Why? Because I need to get this story out before they stop me. Sarah's fingers flew over the keyboard as she uploaded her story to multiple platforms simultaneously. News organizations, social media, government whistleblower sites, international media outlets. Anywhere that would publish it immediately and make it impossible to suppress.
Outside, she could hear vehicles arriving and men shouting orders. Thomas and Agent Walsh were at the windows, weapons drawn, preparing to defend the cabin.
Sarah, how much time do you need? 2 more minutes. But as she was making the final uploads, her laptop screen went black. Someone had cut the internet connection to the cabin.
Thomas, they've cut our communications. Then we do this the old-fashioned way. Thomas handed her a satellite phone and a pre-programmed contact list. Start calling news organizations directly. Read them the story over the phone.
Sarah began calling every news outlet on the list, starting with the largest national organizations. Most calls went to voicemail, but she was able to reach 3 assignment editors who agreed to take the story over the phone.
As she dictated her article to a CNN assignment editor, she could hear gunfire outside the cabin. Thomas and Agent Walsh were engaged in a firefight with whoever had come to silence her. "Ma'am, are you in some kind of danger?" the CNN editor asked. Yes. I'm under attack by the people I'm writing about. Please get this story out immediately. Sarah continued making calls as the gunfight intensified outside. She reached editors at the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the Associated Press. By the time the gunfire stopped, she had given the essential elements of her story to 6 major news organizations. The silence that followed was ominous. Sarah couldn't tell if Thomas and Agent Walsh had won or lost the firefight. Then she heard footsteps on the cabin's front porch. The door opened slowly and Thomas appeared, his face grim but relieved. Sarah, are you okay?
I'm fine.
Did you stop them? For now. But there will be more. How many news organizations did you reach? 6. The story should be on news websites within the hour. Agent Walsh appeared behind Thomas, speaking urgently into her radio. We've got confirmation. Federal arrests are beginning simultaneously in 12 states. Over 40 people are being taken into custody. Sarah felt a wave of relief so intense it made her dizzy. After 3 days of running, hiding, and fearing for her life, the truth was finally coming out. What about David? David is safe and in federal protection. Detective Santos is out of surgery and expected to make a full recovery, and the people who tried to kill all of you are now in custody. Sarah looked around the cabin that had been her sanctuary and battlefield for the past 12 hours. Documents and evidence covered every surface. Computer screens showed news reports of arrests across the country, and there were bullet holes in the windows from the gunfight. Thomas, is it really over? The immediate danger is over. The investigation will continue for months, maybe years. But the organization has been broken, and the people responsible are in custody. Sarah's phone rang. It was Elena. Sarah, oh my God, are you okay? I'm seeing news reports about arrests.